Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has now been in office for nearly 500 days. He was elected on the promise of change and on his pledges to campaign transparent politics and a more public view of Parliament Hill. His first days saw historically high approval ratings and plenty of international recognition. But is the honeymoon over? For their takes, we are joined from Ottawa by National Post columnist John Ivison and iPolitics reporter Janice Dickson. Good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Good morning.
All right, let's start talking about this honeymoon period that Justin Trudeau enjoyed at the beginning of his term. Have we ever seen public sentiment this strong for a Canadian Prime Minister? John, let's start with you.
No, it's quite remarkable. It still continues. I suspect if they put out photographs like you were showing earlier, it might continue for a bit longer. You know, there are things that Justin Trudeau has done on the domestic stage. As soon as you start governing, you end up having a track record, and some of it, as some of the people who voted for him in October 2015 probably are not very happy with. Things like ditching electoral reform, for example. You know, I was surprised. There was a poll out last week about millennials. Their support is as strong as it was in 2015 in the last month or so. So it is amazing how it continues to roll on. But I do think that I'll just finish by saying that over Christmas they saw a little dip in support for the Liberals with the Cash for Access story, and then the idea of him going on a holiday funded by the Aga Khan. That was why he did the listening tour across Canada. I think they've arrested that decline, particularly after his visit to Washington with Donald Trump. All
right, Janice, your thoughts?
Well, we did see a lot of excitement around Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and in the following months after he was elected, he was invited to former President Barack Obama's historic dinner, and that was the first time we saw a Canadian Prime Minister invited in, I think, 17 years or so. So I think it's natural for a lot of momentum to be built around a Prime Minister, and like John mentioned, he did dip in the polls a little bit this past Christmas, but the polls that I've seen indicate that he's hovered around the 50% mark, and he's sliding in a natural projection comparable to other Prime Ministers.
You know, he made a big deal of promising to do it better, and on the topic of promises, he made a lot of them. He's almost, at this point, broken as many as he's achieved.
Well, that's right, and I think that this is a danger going forward. You know, one of the first things he did was he said there would be open nomination meetings, and he almost immediately broke that when Bob Rae, the former leader, stepped down and Chrystia Freeland appeared as a potential candidate in Toronto Centre. He more or less parachuted her into that riding, despite the fact there were other people interested. And we're now seeing that happening. There are 5 by-elections going on. I think in at least 2 of those by-elections, there are candidates who want to run, and they're basically being, you know, edged aside. That type of, you know, you can classify it as arrogance or elitism or whatever you want, top-down governance. That's a real problem for them. It has typically been a problem for the Liberal Party, and I think they've got to be on guard of alienating the grassroots. I mean, this is where the power comes from for Prime Ministers and for MPs. Also, they've got a budget coming up, and that budget is not going to be good news for the Liberal Party, or probably for Canada.
He is making Canadians very proud on the world stage. We saw, you know, the successful trip, by all accounts, to Washington, and then the jaunt over to Europe. He was lauded there. Does this afford him some leniency at all when mistakes are made or promises are broken here at home? Janice?
I think so, because he's seen as doing very well on the international stage, and that allows Canadians, I think, the opportunity to feel proud, and I think it's pretty widely accepted that he's handled new U.S. President Donald Trump well. I don't think he was criticized very much for his meeting with him, and then as we heard President Trump mention Prime Minister Trudeau in his speech last night, I think that's going to bode very well for Mr. Trudeau.
John, you touched on budget, so let's get down to it. This could be, I mean, we saw his approval rating stay fairly high through this ethics dilemma and the investigation by the ethics commissioner. The walk back on electoral reform, you said, hasn't hurt him with millennials who, you know, were largely in support of that issue. But let's talk about this budget. Could this be where he gets into some trouble?
Well, I don't think any one issue ever condemns a Prime Minister to defeat, but it's like a dam and the water building up behind a wall. And I think all of these things, as soon as you make missteps, it's the water rising. You know, on the ethics question and the arrogance question, that's one side that the opposition parties hammer away at. But the real thing that's going to breach that dam is the fiscal situation. And, you know, people like Kevin O'Leary are already talking about, you know, the next election is going to be about people not having their wages rising, about their house price falling, about lack of employment opportunities for their children who are still living in their basements in their mid-20s. You know, those types of things are the real election issues. And this budget is going to show, I suspect, that, you know, rather than having 3 mild $10 billion deficits, and we're going to be out of deficit by 2019, we're going to be $27 billion or more in this one budget, and there's not going to be a lot of good news in this budget, I don't think. So those things will add to people's negative perceptions. And I think, you know, it takes a long time for it to build. For Stephen Harper, it took 10 years before people finally said, well, that's enough. So, you know, Justin Trudeau's probably got a few more years, but this is definitely more water rising, I think.
All right, I want to sum it up with your thoughts. How does Justin Trudeau's image stand right now in Canada? And does it differ than when he was first elected? Janice, we'll start with you, and then John.
Well, I think there's been a few bumps in the road. Electoral reform, I think, is going to hurt him more than his vacation with the Aga Khan and more than these cash for access fundraisers and everything we've heard around that. So I think while there have been a few bumps along the road, I think that generally his image is about the same in some people's view anyway.
John?
Yeah, I think if he should be circulating these pictures of him with his shirt off more. That's probably going to mean as much to more people. But you know, seriously, by doing some of the things he's done, he creates space on the left of the political spectrum for the NDP. You know, approving pipelines, for example, reneging on electoral reform. That breathes new life into the NDP. And breathing new life into the NDP also breathes life into the Conservatives, because both sides are eating into the Liberal numbers. And I think that inevitably, as soon as you start governing, you're going to do things that are going to annoy people, and that means that he cannot possibly be where he was 18 months ago.
All right, thank you both for joining us today from Ottawa.